What's up guys, it's Advanced Gaming, and today I'm going to show you how to build a computer. CPU installation is fairly simple. As you can see, there are pins on this side of the CPU, and there's a corner with a triangle on it. All you're going to do is match up this corner with the triangle to a corner with a triangle on the motherboard. The triangle on the motherboard can sometimes be hard to see, but it's there. Next, you're going to place the CPU down, get everything lined up, and once it's down, you can pull the lever, and that'll lock it into place. Once your CPU is installed, you can move on to installing your RAM. RAM installation is fairly simple. You just line up this corner on the RAM to this corner on the motherboard, make sure everything's lined up in the middle, and push down. You should hear 1 or 2 clicks, depending on the motherboard style. Most motherboards are going to be 2. And then you're going to just gently pull on it to make sure it stays down. Repeat this process for however many RAM sticks you have, and then you can move on to the next step. SSD installation is pretty simple. Most SSDs are going to come with these little standoffs. You just have to screw these into whatever the corresponding hole in your motherboard is. Most SSDs are going to be 2280, but there are other sizes. Once you have your thing screwed in, you're going to put your SSD into the slot, making sure you line up the notch in the SSD and the notch in the motherboard. And then you grab the screw that came with your SSD or your motherboard and screw the SSD into the standoff. If you have more than one SSD, you repeat this process. Now we can move on to putting the motherboard into the case. I would recommend moving your case so that it's flat on the table, which makes it a bit easier to install your motherboard. You're going to line up the motherboard with the little screws on the case, and then you're going to make sure before you put your motherboard in that you have this little plate in the back of the case. It's not a huge deal if you don't, but it's definitely nice to have and makes the computer look a bit cleaner. Throw that on there. It's sometimes a pain, but you just gotta put a lot of force into it and get it to snap in. Once that's in, you can throw your motherboard in, line up the screws, and put in a few. You never really need to put all the screws in. I usually only go with 3, 4, or maybe 5, but I never do all 9, though if you want to, you're welcome to. After our motherboards are installed, we can tilt our case back up and we can mess with the cables in the back. I highly recommend moving your cables through the cable management holes on the motherboard. This makes your computer overall look cleaner and gives it a more nice aesthetic, especially if you have a glass side panel. You're going to want to plug in your front I/O. This is going to be your power button, reset button, HDD LED, and standard power LED. I do recommend you check your motherboard's manual to make sure you're plugging them into the right hole, as not every motherboard has the same layout. Once your front panel is connected, you can connect any other connections your case might have, such as USB, audio, or RGB headers. Once all our case connections are done, we can move on to installing our hard drives. Hard drive installation is pretty simple. All you need are 2 cables, and right now we're only going to be using 1. We're going to find a SATA data cable. That's going to be your smaller cable, and we're just going to plug one end into the bottom of the hard drive and the other end into the correct SATA port on our motherboard. Once we have our hard drives installed, we can move on to the next step. Next up, we're going to install our water cooler. Most water coolers won't be installed like this, but some might. You're going to throw your fan on top of your case, take the screw that came with your water cooler, and put it through the fan to keep the water cooler mounted to the top of the case. Then, add a few more screws on that fan and move on to the next fan. Next, we're going to install the pump portion of our AIO. We're going to put the pump on the CPU. We're going to get the little latches lined up with the mounting brackets on our motherboard that came with it. And then we're going to screw them in to get everything to fit nicely. Next, we're going to wire up the RGB of our fans and our pump. You can either wire these into the motherboard or into the RGB controller that came with your cooler or fans. I prefer to wire them into the motherboard, but either method will work fine. You're going to take the male ends, plug them into the female ends, and you're going to get all of the fans connected to each other. Then take the male or female end that's left and plug it into either the RGB controller or the motherboard. Next, we're going to install our power supply. You're going to put the power supply in the power supply bay in the bottom of your case, making sure that the fan is facing the bottom so it can get some nice cool fresh air and keep all the critical power supplying components cooled and not breaking that may end up breaking your computer. Now you're going to take all the cables and wire them into the correct ports. Your big 24 pin that probably says ATX or ATX power on it is going to go into the big 24 pin ATX power slot on your motherboard. Your 8-pin powered adapter, probably labeled CPU, is going to go into the top of the case, labeled CPU. But before we install any other cables, we need to install our GPU. We're going to take this little PCIe slot on the bottom of the GPU, and we're going to line it up with the PCIe slot in our motherboard. We're going to plug it in, wait until we hear a click. Now we're going to hold it here as we grab a screw that should have come with our motherboard to secure it so it won't damage the motherboard or itself. Now we're going to put the screw in, and then we can move on to plugging in our GPU. You're going to want to grab the cable labeled PCIe. You're going to take the cable that matches with the number of pins you need on your GPU, plug it in, then you're going to grab another cable if you need it, and plug that one in as well. Most GPUs will need an 8 and 6 pin or an 8 and 8 pin, but the number will vary depending on the GPU you have. Some newer GPUs have a 16 pin single slot, but most people prefer PCIe cables. Now we can plug in our fans and AYANEO pump. You're going to plug your fan into the fan part. Usually fans are going to be CPU fan or CHA fan, but they could be anything. Plug it into the 4-pin fan slot, lining up the little line on the side of the fan plug with the line on the motherboard, and plug in your pump into the slot labeled AYANEO pump. Once these are all plugged in, you're good to go. And here we are. After you wire everything back up, close up your case, and plug in a monitor, keyboard, and mouse, you can test if the computer works. You'll see this American Megatrends start screen. You're going to hit F1 to get into your BIOS, and then you can go change your settings. Set up fan curves, turn on resizable bar, and turn on DOCP or XMP. Alright guys, I really hope you enjoyed. I had a ton of fun making this, even if it is a little overdue. I really hope it helps you start your PC adventure, and I hope you get to building that computer you've always wanted. If this is helpful, leave a like, and if not, leave some feedback in the comments down below. I'd be happy to hear your thoughts and concerns. I'm Advanced Gaming, and I'll see you in the next one.